So in case you're interested in downloading the slides or checking them out, that's the short URL, that's Triveous / impactful onboarding. Definitely check it out. Okay, so like I mentioned, right, this is our first in a series of various topics on building for India. And we're super excited about this, right? We have been working on various mobile products for the last 10 years, right? And we have never actually gotten the opportunity to talk about this in detail. So this is our opportunity to talk about design as well as the development of such products and give back to the community. So this is the first talk. There are going to be a lot more talks coming up. If you want to learn more about those talks, if you want to get a recording of this session, or read the blog post about it, or even understand this through a cheat sheet. Maybe you didn't have time to go through the entire talk, right? If you want to just get an overview of what's going on, definitely we're going to create a cheat sheet and share it with you so that you can again share it with other people as well, right? And so this link, triveous.substack.com, is where our newsletter will be shared. So definitely sign up and be a part of this movement of building for India. So this is the agenda for today. We have a lot to cover, right? We'll begin by understanding a little bit about why onboarding is important, right? What is the retention curve, right? What are some of the associated metrics with respect to onboarding, right? We just begin by getting an understanding of onboarding. Then we'll talk about the problems with onboarding. A lot of you might think that onboarding is actually fine, right? Why is Soham even talking about it? So we'll look at users and actually how they perceive onboarding. Then we'll talk about activation. Activation is something really important, right? It's the moment at which people know, right, why they are using a certain product. So it's a very important thing. I don't find a lot of information online about this, especially in the Indian context. So we'll take a real case study of an Agri-tech product and we'll show you, right, what activation could mean or could look like in that scenario. We'll then actually try to understand the problems there and actually try to solve it, okay, with real screenshots or with real example of other apps as well. And finally, I'll give you an overview of some of the key things that you have to keep in mind if you are building an effective onboarding experience for your product or startup. Okay, we'll also talk about impact in numbers and metrics, right? Because this is about creating impactful onboarding experiences, not just about creating great onboarding experiences. Quick introduction about myself. I'm Soham. I'm the founding partner at Triveous along with my colleague Farman. And I'm also a lead anchor mentor at GFS, or Google for Startups. I've been mentoring startups for over 5 to 6 years now. And that's also given me an amazing opportunity to see startups across the domain and see some of the great things they're doing and some of the mistakes they're making, right? So I'm going to try and get all my learnings from those 5 to 6 years and 10 plus years of product building into this presentation. In case you're interested in following me on LinkedIn or social media, those are my handles. Would love to talk to you or discuss this at some point. I'll also briefly talk about Triveous, right? The company where Farman and me are partners, right? We have a long history of working on India-focused products. Way back in 2013, we were building fintech products, right? When fintech was not really a hot sector, to be honest. We were creating micro ATM solutions based on Aadhaar, right? Very, very interesting solutions based on mobile phones using the power of technology, even way back in 2013. And since then, we have done a lot of work, right, across sectors. We've worked on fintech, we've worked on edtech with Imperative, worked with Google quite a bit. We've worked with Friend, which is a non-profit, right, where it's about empowering women, right. In rural India, we've created offline-first mobile products. We've worked quite a bit with NovoPay in the fintech space again, with IDEO, with companies like Google AI, with Bharat Agri, a lot of different players across the space, right? And we've gained a lot of experience through the years. One specific project that I want to really call out is our work with IDEO, right? Who are the global leaders in the design space, and we've worked with them to create this framework called digital confidence or design. A lot of what I talk about, right, with respect to Novice Internet users, who they are, how do you create different experiences for them, including onboarding experiences, home screen experiences. A lot of that is kind of condensed in this framework, right? It's a very interesting framework created with in association with ITO, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Google Next Billion User team, right? So again, if you're interested, definitely go and check them out. It's a really interesting framework. So let's begin by talking about why is onboarding important? Why does it even matter to you, right? So onboarding is a really important thing, right? Because acquisition is an investment, right? It doesn't matter who you are, right? If you're a designer, developer, entrepreneur, product manager, you're spending your months, your years in a certain startup or a product, and you're investing that time and effort into that product, right? What are you trying to do? You're trying to work on that product. And all that effort boils down in the moment when somebody installs that product, right? Or visits that product. It could be on a website, it could be on an app. And then the person decides whether they want to actually use that product in the first 30 seconds or a minute or so, right? That is why acquisition and activation and onboarding is so important. So you're investing so much time into a product, right? And that time, right, is an investment that you're making, right? As members of that team. Apart from that, right, like companies actually spend money, right? They're spending $2, $10, $20 in acquiring users today. How many of those users actually get converted into paying users or retained users? All of those things are very, very important. In my opinion, every single person that's installing your app that you are acquiring is an investment, right? And you should treat it as an investment, right? You should get the maximum return on that investment, right? So many startups that I have worked with, I see that they install a certain product and never come back to that product. And these startups have worked so hard to create that product. And I definitely don't want to see that, right? And that's why I'm creating this presentation and talking to you so that you can get the maximum return on your investment when you're building a product, right? That is why onboarding is so important. In the first 30 seconds, people decide whether they want to install or use the product that you have worked on, right? That's why onboarding is so important. A good onboarding can make the difference between you're spending 1,000 rupees to acquire a person and then that person actually using it in the longer term versus you spending that money and that person never coming back to the app, right? Also, you have to remember that onboarding is the first step in the entire product lifecycle, right? Apart from acquisition, you acquire a user, right? And between acquisition and product market fit at some later point, the first step after acquisition is onboarding, right? So you can't really think of achieving product market fit or a positive unit economics. All those things are things that will come later. You cannot think of doing that without getting onboarding correct first, right? It's very important to think of onboarding first. And time is critical, right? Because people have such short attention spans, especially on mobile phones, right? They don't want to spend time, right? Like getting onboarded, to be very frank. Why? Because social media has spoiled us, right? You're constantly swiping. As you're swiping, you're going to the next slide or the next photo. And if it's not good, you're swiping again. People don't have attention uh, anymore, right, to give you. So whatever you have to do in onboarding has to be quick and has to be effective, right? And that's the difference between spending 1,000 rupees and actually getting somebody who's going to stay at the end of the onboarding experience with you, right? Let's say you're acquiring a user for 1,000 rupees and it takes you 10 people to get one retained user. That means out of 10 people who are installing your app, only one of them actually will stay with you in the long term, right? In that kind of scenario, uh, right, we're not actually spending 1,000 rupees per user, you're spending 10,000 rupees, right, to get one retained user, right? And 9 of those users are gone forever, right? Retargeting them, reacquiring them is very difficult. People can call them and say, why don't you install this app again? Why did you uninstall? That's possible, but very unlikely and very expensive, right? Because you have to make that effort. You have to call that person, right? So it's important to get onboarding right and get right first, right? You can save money. It's good for you, and it's the beginning of the entire product's life cycle. So it's important that you get this right the first time. Now, there are lots of different ways of looking at this, right? Especially when you talk about a product as a whole, right? There are different frameworks that talk about this. Today, I'm going to talk about the AARRR framework. It's also called the Pirate Metrics framework. It's created by Dave McClure, right, from 500 Startups fame. And although I'm talking about this framework, you can use any other framework as well, right? You can use any of the other frameworks. They are analogs to what I'll talk about essentially, right? What this framework talks about is essentially the product life cycle goes through these 5 steps. The first step is acquisition, right? You're acquiring a customer. It could be through organic means like word of mouth. It could be through marketing or campaigns, right? Whatever, through a Play Store listing, through a search, right? After that comes activation. Now, activation is very important. It's the beginning of this. This after acquisition is when the onboarding journey begins. Now, activation is the point where the user really gets what the app is all about or the product is all about, right? Um, it's very important to you for you to know what this activation means. I'll talk about that, right? So unless the user is activated, unless they know what is the value proposition of the product, right? There's no point going into retention, referral, revenue. All the things come later. Retention is when people are coming back to the app. That will only happen typically when the user knows the value proposition of the app. They have this aha moment. Okay, aha, I get what this app is all about, right? Referral happens even later, right? Only once you keep coming back to the app would you think about referring it to somebody else, or would you feel like paying for it, right? Revenue. So this is called the AARRR or Pirate Metrics funnel, right? And activation is a very important second step over here, right? And we talk about onboarding, right? It's very important in the context before, right? A lot of people install an app, you're acquiring these users, but they never come back to the app, right? So this is a graph of time on the x-axis on the right hand side, and on the y-axis you have people who are using the app actively. So as time moves on, right, people lesser and lesser people actually keep coming back to the app, right? Because most apps are not relevant to everybody, right? So you might install an app, but you might never come back. But for a lot of startups that I have worked with, this graph actually intersects with the x-axis. It means that after a point, the number of people who are coming back to the app is zero essentially. Right? So you might be spending 1,000, 10,000 rupees, like a lot of money acquiring these users. But they all might be churned or they might leave the platform very, very soon. Right? This is a very, very serious issue, right? Because you're spending money and it's literally like uh, you know uh, putting that money on fire, right? Because nobody's going to stay in the app in the long term, right? So if you're lucky, if you've done a good job, right, what happens is this curve stabilizes towards the right hand side. It forms a plateau. That means those are the groups of users that keep coming back to the app after a certain point of time, right? That is what you want to get to at some point, right? Because that means that after a certain point, right, these are the people who have gotten the value proposition of the app and they keep coming back. You've retained these users. And your goal as a startup is to get this as high as possible, right? Physically possible for your category of products, right? Some products are just transactional. You do it once, you don't come back to it. But depending on the category that you're in, the idea is to get this plateau as high as possible and far away as possible from the x-axis, right? That's where onboarding really comes in. Because if you have a bad onboarding experience, you'll forget the retention part. That will never happen because they haven't gotten the value proposition, right? Why should they come back to it? So the talk is about creating impactful onboarding experience, not just creating any onboarding experience, right? So impact comes from numbers, from metrics, right? I'll talk about 3 categories of metrics that you can use to measure your onboarding experience, right? The first is conversions. I showed you the funnel, right? People typically come from acquisition, from a campaign, from some other source. How many of them are getting activated? How many of them are actually getting the value proposition of the app, right? That's the most important metric for you, right? Before you solve anything else, you have to solve the acquisition to activation funnel, right? A lot of those terms might not be familiar to you, but I'll talk about them in the coming few slides, right? It's an important number that you should keep in mind. The second is downstream metrics, right? Engagement, retention, revenue, referral. Those can happen later, right? But for a lot of products that I've seen, right, they have like very small, non-increasing engagement numbers, right? the engagement numbers don't increase with time. That's mainly because people get churned out all the time, right? It could be because your product is not great. It could also be because your onboarding experience was lackluster, right? So you always got to try to kind of track these metrics and see where you're going wrong. Right? The final metric, which is very important for most companies, is cost per install. How much are you spending to acquire a user, right? In fact, what's the effective cost per install? Like the example I gave before, if 10 people are installing your app, only one of them stay in the long term, right? Your cost, if you're spending 1,000 rupees for a single person over 10 people, is 10,000 rupees, right? Uh, what is the effective cost? You're spending 10,000 rupees, right, to acquire a single effective retained user, right? So these are important metrics for you to track, right? If you just track cost per install, you feel like you're doing really well. You spend 1,000 rupees, when in turn you're actually spending 10,000 rupees because that user is not retained. Only 1 in 10 users are retained, right? So all these numbers are really important, and I'll come back to them, right, after I talk about onboarding. So you will understand, right, how a good onboarding can impact all these numbers. Now, problems with onboarding. A lot of you might think that, Soham, my product, my app is doing really well. I have a great onboarding experience, right? And you might be correct, you might be true, right? But I'll give you a real world example, right, of what seems like a good onboarding experience might not be that great in the real world, right? Before that, it makes sense to talk about Mamta and about people, about users, right? None of this makes sense, right? Uh, none of this makes sense unless you understand your users, right? Onboarding is for users, right? Again, I'll try to generalize and talk about Novice Internet Users, who they are, right? Talk a little bit about Mamta. But what you have to know is you have to understand the context for your product, right? And what it means to onboard them, right? So let me talk about India in general, right? And Novice Internet Users. So let me talk about Mamta. Mamta is a woman from Jaipur, right? She's gotten a Samsung J2 phone, which has been passed to her by somebody in the family, right? So somebody in the family had a phone, it fell down, it broke, and eventually, right, was passed on to Mamta. And it's a very important device for her. It's like a window to the world for her, right? She plays music on it. She learns different things, right? And she finds typing really difficult. She likes to communicate through voice, right? Maybe she has literacy or digital literacy issues, but voice is really important to her. She can ask for things very naturally, right? But sometimes when the environment is not good, the voice interactions are not good as well, and she struggles and she blames herself that she's not good enough, right? So this is a snapshot of a user from India, right? This is Mamta, right? But she still wants to use her phone effectively. Now, the story is just not about Mamta, folks, right? It's about a larger group of people, right? So Mamta is an example of a novice internet user. A novice internet user, who are they? So they are people who don't see the internet as a key way to advance their key needs and aspirations. What does that mean, right? So if Mamta, let's say she's a housewife, right? She wants to cook really good food, or she wants better education for her kids, right? She doesn't see the internet as an opportunity to further that cause, that she can help her kids learn more via the internet, or she can cook better, right? Or maybe she can do a business on the side using the internet, right? It could be that, or it also could be that she knows that the internet is really powerful, but she doesn't have the right digital literacy or the confidence to actually go ahead and use the internet for all these things, right? So it could be either one of those two things, right? First, she doesn't know about the power of the internet, or she knows the power of the internet, but she feels like she's not capable enough, or she won't be able to do this, right? Using her smartphone, right? So it's not just about Mumbai, folks. It's about a lot of people, right? A lot of people across the world face the same problems. They might have a smartphone, right? In fact, they might have a very fancy smartphone, but still they might not know the power of the internet, right? In fact, I know so many of my family members who have the Flipkart app installed, who have phone pay app installed, Google Pay app installed, but they don't transact on those platforms because they're not confident enough, right? They're not confident in buying things online, right? Why does this happen? Because they're novice internet users, right? They're not. They might know about something, but they're not confident enough in using it, right? So a lot of these people face problems in accounts, right? The concept of an account might be very alien to them, right? Remembering passwords, all these things are difficult to them, right? They're not like you or me who are just very tech savvy or digitally literate, right? They might not have the same discovery and navigation skills that you and I have, right? We can figure out apps. We can go through the entire app and figure out where some things are. But novice internet users like Mamta don't typically have that capability, right? They might struggle to find out about features. They might also feel lost in these platforms, right? Because in the physical world, you can just go and ask people for help. But in a digital world, right, you don't know how to ask for help. They feel so lost, right? And finally, they also find, they have challenges around language. Seeing the menus of a phone in English might turn somebody like Mamta away from a product or app. Now, why am I telling you all of this? All of these are tied to onboarding, right? If you have Mamta at the end of your mobile app, just imagine, right, how many of those things that I just mentioned might actually turn her away, make her feel like this app or product is not for me, right? Do you have an account, a very complicated account setup during onboarding, right? How is she going to discover features in the product? Let's say you're a ed tech startup, right? Are you expecting her to go and attend a class or something, right? Or how does she even go about doing that, right? How is language selection done? Is everything localized, right? Like in terms of like search, in terms of content, right? So all these problems that she faces are going to play a very important role in the onboarding process. Let me explain to you. Let me give an example. A lot of this will get clearer when I give you a real world example, right? Uh, this is an Agri-tech app. An Agri-tech app is an app which a farmer might use to help them with their crops, right? So that they can get a better price for their produce, they can sell better, they can grow their crops better, they can get access to guidance on pests and fertilizers, etc. And hopefully you get the picture. Now, this is an Agri-tech app, right? And you can see the onboarding experience here. The first screen over here is where the user selects the language, right? You select, a couple of languages, right? Then I'm supposed to enter some information, right? My name, my phone number, my OTP, right? And then I'm just taken to the home screen, right? And it says, right, you want to complete your profile, you just want to go to the home screen. Most people will just say, I'll just do this later, and you come to the home screen, which looks like that. Okay, so I want you to take a moment and just pause and think about this, right? Is this a great onboarding experience according to you? Or can this be made better? Is there anything lacking over here? Take a moment. Let's all think about this for a couple of seconds. Right. So hopefully you've had a moment to just like think about this, right? What is wrong here? Right? And the actual answer is a lot of people I have shown this to have said, there's nothing wrong here. It's a perfectly fine onboarding experience. Some people have told me, okay, it's missing the typical carousel of images, right? You show like an image plus value proposition. It's the only thing that's missing, right? And yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong, right? This is an okay onboarding experience, but let me tell you some of the problems of this onboarding experience, right? Let's think from the perspective of a user, an actual user. This is Manjunath, right? So we've created a virtual, like a persona of somebody who might use this app, right? You can go and check out our website, triveous.com/product transformation. We've done this entire case study. We've talked about onboarding, we've talked about home screen, etc. And this will give you a picture of the user who's facing this problem, right? Who might have installed this Agri-tech app. So Manjunath, I'm not going into details. He's like a multi-generational, like an ancestral farmer. Okay. And if you think about him, right, like what we typically do in design is we create a persona, right? Which defines what his needs are, why is he coming on the platform, right? These kind of things. And now, see, this is something that we do typically in design, right? But what's important to note is on the bottom left-hand side, right? Uh, you see the 4 icons over here. This is very important, right? Manjunath, the first icon means that he's a 2 out of 5 in terms of digital literacy or in terms of smartphone savviness, right? So he's not that comfortable using a smartphone. He can use it for making phone calls, making simple Google searches. He's okay with that. But anything advanced, he's not that comfortable. He's also not comfortable making transactions online. That's the second symbol, right? Internet, he's okay with the internet. He doesn't know the power of it, but he's okay searching for stuff, right? And finally, the final things about social, right? How comfortable is he kind of sharing his knowledge, his thoughts with other people, right? How okay is he with communicating with other people, so, right? Right, and yeah, so this is a little bit about Manjunath, right? These bottom things are very, very important. Why? Because they will tell you how this person might behave in onboarding, right? Let's come back to the onboarding flow over here. A person like Manjunath who's not very tech savvy, who's not digitally literate, so to say, right? And let's say he's coming from a specific part of the country. What if Manjunath doesn't see his language on the first screen? Right? Do you think he'll feel good about installing the app? Right? Again, I'm not giving you the answer, but I'm just thinking. Right? Right? Once Manjunath comes to the home screen, which is the rightmost screen over here, what do you think he'll think? Do you think he'll be able to explore the app on his own? Right? Is it becoming clear to you what is the capability of the app just from the last screen over there? Do you think somebody like Manjunath, who's struggling with just like basic functions, can figure all this stuff out himself? Very important questions to answer, right? So let me quickly talk about this onboarding approach and some of the problems with this, right? For Manjunath, when he's installing this app, the app's value proposition is not clear, right? From any of these steps, right? You might say, okay, if I add a carousel and I'll show, some things over there, yeah, it'll add to it. But still, right, the value proposition is not that clear. You can tell me something, but just by telling me, will I understand? I'm not sure, right? Especially if I'm Manjunath, right? The second problem is activation, right? I feel like Manjunath will not get to that point where he gets the use of the app, very frankly, right? And a lot of farmers like him might be in the same bucket, right? So you have to think, right, who your users are and are they getting to this aha moment where they get the value proposition of the app, right? Chances are they are not. Okay, so the onboarding flow also might be complex. In fact, if you see the screen on the right hand side, you asked for my name, my phone number, OTP, everything is in the same screen. It might be a little complex. It seems like a simple screen with 3 options, right? Which you or I might be very comfortable like filling up, right? We do this every day. But for somebody like Manjunath, he doesn't know, right, where to click. What is the action option over here? What is OTP, right? Yeah, I mean, you and me take this for granted, right? But having 3 options for such a user might be complex. Especially for rural India, given how many apps we've built, we've seen it much simpler when we ask one question, get the answer, ask the second question, get the answer, and help the user throughout the entire process, right? Assistance, right? Sometimes you get lost. What if they don't know what is OTP or they've received the OTP, doesn't autofill, right? They don't have any person to ask, right? What do I do now? How do I even get to the home screen? You see where I'm coming from, right? Finally, language, right? What if the language is not their language? Do you feel like they'll feel inclusive? They'll feel like this app is for me, right? So I've given you the example of an Agri-tech app, but the truth is there are many such apps out there, right? And you have to ask yourself, where in the scale of good versus bad does your product come in? How can you improve your product in a better way, right? So we've talked a lot about activation. Right? We've told that Manjunath doesn't get the value of the app, and he might never get that value, right? So what is this activation thing? Where do you get the value of the app, right? Now I'll come back to this Dave McClure's funnel, right? Acquisition, activation, right? Uh, I'll take another analogy over here, right? Like a lot of people have seen BMW cars on the road, right? So if you're a BMW salesperson, right, you don't have to acquire users, right? I mean, we all have heard of the brand, so acquisition, brand recognition is already there, right? So acquisition is already happening. But as a layperson, right, you might always be thinking, why are people paying so much for a BMW car? It could be BMW, Mercedes, whatever, right? Right? That's because you have not been activated, right? A lot of us, me included, right, always wondered, right, like why is a BMW car worth so much, right? And it's only when you sit in the car, right, on a windy road, you hold the wheel and you drive, that you will get in the first 5 seconds why the car is worth the money, right? That kind of feeling, the exhilaration, the kind of rush of adrenaline that you will get in the first 5 seconds activates you. You'll get why this car is worth the money, right? But for a lot of people who've never sat in the car, right, for Mercedes is something else, right? Like the moment you sit in the car, the comfort level, the isolation will activate you. You will get why the brand talks about all those things, why the car is so good, right? And that is a quick analogy to kind of explain what activation is for you, right? For your product or what it could mean for your product. Okay, so for me, right, activation, I look at it as the light bulb moment for people, right? It's when they get what the product is all about, right? It could be a car like the BMW example I gave, it could be anything else. So I use the know, do, feel, believe framework for this, right? The 4-step framework. The first is knowing, right? To get activated, I feel you have to go through the entire steps, right? All the 4 steps. Like a lot of us might know about BMW, right? You might tell me it's like a really fast car, it's really comfortable, whatever, right? That's not the same as actually feeling that rush of speed, adrenaline, right? It's very different, right? So knowing is different from feeling, right? And to get to that feeling, you have to do something, right? You have to drive that, you have to take that first punch of the accelerator, right? That's when you feel the adrenaline. That's what you get the value. So to activate somebody, right? It's not just enough to show them the carousel screens on in the onboarding flow, right? You can tell them 100 things. This Agri-tech app will give you the best prices. It will help you with all your crop diseases. It can tell you all those things, but that is not enough, right? In fact, chances are if you're doing marketing, if you have a good brand recognition, people already know about that, right? The question is, the answer gets resolved after that, right? Like what are you doing to make people realize that? That's something that you have to think about, right? What is the action that people can perform in the first 30 seconds? If a BMW, right, it's first couple of seconds that you'll feel the adrenaline, you'll be sold on the product. So in a mobile context, what can you do in the first 10, 30, 60 seconds that gives them that same feeling, right? So what can you help them do? I'll give you examples of this, right? Typically, right, the brain works in this way. If you do something, you get that value proposition very quickly. I can tell you, right, like, oh, this is the best app, this, that. People will never get it unless they do it for themselves and feel that, right? What will they feel? They feel that excitement, that happiness, that confidence, that connection with the product, right? This is for them. And with that feeling, finally comes that belief that, okay, I want this, or this is useful for me, this is relevant to me, right? So activation is like that, right? It's not just about knowing. A lot of us know different things. It's about doing, which makes you feel, which finally makes you believe this is the right thing for me. And you have to get to that belief in 30 seconds flat, right? That's essentially what you have to do. So the goal of this talk essentially is to tell you in terms of features, right? And in terms of magnitude, metrics, and numbers, what activation means for you, right? Let's say you're an EdTech app. A feature that will give you that rush could be attending an amazing live session or attending a live session, and being in that classroom, that feeling, right? Magnitude metric numbers means maybe you have to attend 2 sessions before you're convinced. For BMW, it's the first 5 seconds you press the accelerator, you're convinced, right? So whatever product you've got, you have to think about what is activation mean to you fundamentally, right? If it means you have to attend 2 classes, talk to 5 students, right, in your class, then all you have to do is get people to those experiences really quickly, right? Let's say I am a person, let's hypothetically, right, I had the money to buy a BMW, right? If you're a BMW salesman, all you have to do is to get me in a test drive somehow. If that means you have to come to my house, give me a free ride, take me, to a fancy dinner, whatever, that's fine, right? But I'll get that ride where I'll drive it myself and I'll feel like, okay, this is for me. Hopefully you get the analogy, right? So this is how you have to start thinking, right? I'm trying to kind of make you think in this way. Okay, so let's look at real successful products and how they do activation correctly, right? And in fact, I will define activation in 2 ways, and this is my classification, right? Active activation, where you're really, activating things, activating people actively, right? And there's a passive one where you can do certain things, but people take it very passively. They don't really react to it very well. Let's talk about active first. This is the example of phone pay, right? I've just taken a screenshot. Um, and on the right hand side, I've showed different strategies that you can adopt that most apps, most successful apps you will see try, right, in the real world. The first is showing possibilities, right? You see, phone pay is a great example of this. Right? Across the entire product, it will always show you the possibilities in the product, right? Well, you will look at navigation on the home screen. It will show you possibilities of everywhere that you can go, right? So if I install PhonePe, if the time land up on the home screen, it shows me, right? You can do mobile recharge, you can do DTH, you can do this, you can do that, right? And it shows, right, what the product is all about. I don't have to keep guessing. And these are actual use cases which are useful to me, right? So just showing possibilities, what it can do, right, is going to kind of help you there, right? Um, Same, right? Like in a BMW, you just press the accelerator, it shows you what's possible. Very simple, right? Second is personalization, right? People are different, right? So my onboarding experience, my home screen experience shouldn't be the same as yours, to be very honest, right? So you can customize the experience based on people. Very simple, right? So if you look at PhonePe, a lot of other apps as well, um, things that I do a lot or I might do a lot is prioritized. Right? So most people in PhonePe, right, actually send money transfers to other people, to mobile numbers, to bank UPI IDs. You want to check your balance. That's right at the top. That's a common thing. But for me, right, they've got this section at the bottom where I do a lot of DTH recharges for folks, right, and I pay my electricity bill, I update my credit card bill. All of those things happen a lot for me, and you can see how my home screen is customized for me, right? Sometimes this can happen over time. Sometimes it can happen right after onboarding, right? If you ask the right questions, right? So if you show a generic home screen versus a home screen that's customized to you just by asking questions, people are ready to answer, right? You are more likely to feel connected with the one that shows you stuff that you want to hear or want to see, right? Again, very important activation technique is personalization, right? Because you're investing time in answering the questions. And when you see the result based on that answer, you are invested in that already. And you feel like this product is for me, right? Assistance, right? Sometimes, you're lost in all these things, especially for a fintech product like PhonePe. The best products I've seen have help a click away, right? I know I might have never seen that or clicked on that, but in PhonePe, you've seen on the right hand side, at the very top, there's a help icon. You can go and talk to other people, right? And we've seen this work a lot in rural India, right? We've done a lot of work there, and over there, what we've done is just like providing textual help or FAQs doesn't work, right? We've done like voice assistants where we are actually speaking to people in an offline, like multilingual way, so that almost feels like a conversation with a person we want to help, right? It's almost like somebody is near you and trying to help you and guide you. like you would get help in the real world, right? If you're stuck in traffic or you're lost, right? People would come and help you. That's the same attitude and the same thought process you should have when you're building these experiences. It's also about localization, right? How can you localize the app? A lot of people think that just like translation of the labels is localization, but it's a lot more than that. It's about localizing the brand, right? If the icon relates to me, right? Like if you look at the Flipkart app, it's a card there, right? It's in the name as well, but it's a card in the logo. Will you relate to it, right? What will you relate to as, if you're a farmer, if it's somebody from a tier 2, tier 3 city, right? What color will relate to you? Again, purple is always associated with luxury, with money, right? So it's a very good kind of uh, mental hack for you to actually like the app, right? API responses, right? If you're searching for something, if the API responses come in a local language, right? You feel again, this app really understands and gets me, right? So a lot of these things, even your app store presence, right? Are you providing localized screenshots? Are you providing localized names, right? So that people feel like this is an app for me, right? For Manjunath, if the app store screenshots were in his home language, in his native tongue, he'll feel like, okay, this is an app for me. He's already activated before he installs the app to a certain extent, of course, right? So a lot of techniques. Again, I don't have time to go into the details, but hopefully you get a picture of what I'm talking about, right? Passive activation, right? This is where there are lots of different techniques around traditional techniques around activation, right? Active is where people behave in a different way. Passive is where you might just dismiss it. This is a very interesting paper by Nielsen Normal Group. They are one of the pioneers of UX and usability, right? And they have a paper which says instructional overlays and coach marks for mobile apps, right? And the summary is really interesting here. They say that instructions in mobile applications must be designed for optimal scalability, as users tend to dismiss them quickly and do not read thoroughly, right? What does this mean, right? You might have seen this. If you have a mobile app, you'll get all these alerts, right? Like swipe left, swipe right, click this to do this. What have we ever done with it? We've just clicked, tap somewhere to make it go away, right? So this is what I mean by passive, right? You can be passive and show an alert like this and expect people to get activated, right? This is called a coaching message or a showcase, right? You can do this by an animation, make it a little fancier, right? But in my opinion, right, this has not worked really well, right? Most people tend to skip it. So if I ask you, right, have you done onboarding? You'll say yes. Okay, I have done onboarding. I have put these, onboarding carousel, right? And I've put this coach marks everywhere, right? And then I ask the person, how many times have you actually kind of viewed a single coach mark in your life? And the answer is, I've never done this. I want to explore and find this out myself, right? So you have to take care of psychology and people's behaviors when you're thinking about all of this, right? And there are alerts also, right? Like after you install an app, if you don't use it for a day, you've logged in. Next day you get a call from me saying, why haven't you installed the app? Or why aren't you using it? Right? Just imagine what is the cost of that call, right? To make calls en masse to all these people, right? Just to get people to use the app, right? Why don't you solve onboarding proactively rather than waiting for that call, right? Anyway, so these are some passive activation techniques: coaching, showcasing, alerts, right? Let me use all these techniques, especially the active techniques, right, to show you some solutions, right? So this was the problem statement before the Agri-tech app, where I told you it was not great, but right. So this is how we would have redesigned it. It's like a hypothetical study, right? The first screen where we have the languages, of course, we would love to support more languages, right? The more languages you support, the better it is, especially for Novice Internet users and the vast majority of Indians. And again, Novice Internet users is not just about India; it's about the world, right? Would have a very you could have a user in the US who has like a smartphone, a very advanced smartphone, but they still might not be comfortable, or they might not know the entire scope of the internet, right? Anyway, coming back over here, right? Like the first screen is relatively the same, but the second screen, I've added the carousel myself, right? But the focus here is on imagery, right? A lot of people might not read the fine details, especially the body text you see at the bottom, but people will see the image, they will relate to the image, right? And this is really important, right? This is what we want to do, right? The brain processes images at a completely different level, right? It has a different processing unit that's many, many, many times faster or more efficient than text, right? So if you're showing like an image like this, and if you're doing an animation, it captures people's attention, you can communicate so much faster and more efficiently with images, right? Images speak 1,000 words, right? So it's very important to pick the right images, right? So a lot of people might actually get, at least might get an idea of what your product is about from the image, and have taken so much of the screen, right? And then you have a title, right? The title is, at least some people might read the title, right? Assume that majority might not, but at least the title should be very captivating, right? You'll get the best market price, or you'll protect your crops from pests, right? So at least you'll be curious enough to know what's going on, right? And then the body text might be something that you're not reading. That's fine, right? So we're constantly applying our active activation tricks, right? Then I'm actually asking the people to enter some questions, basically answer my questions, right? So I'm asking them to add a crop. Why? Because people are always willing to answer questions, but this is where I give them an opportunity to feel connected to the app. They are asking me what problem I'm having, what is my crop. Most apps don't. Most people don't care. Most apps don't care. This is the first app that Manjunath might feel okay. They're asking me why I'm growing potato, wheat, right? At least they're listening to me. Right? It's also the second reason is also because it's an investment from their side. They are entering information, so they are more likely to spend more time with the app. Again, there's a lot of psychological research-based reasons that I'll not talk about, but essentially, yeah, you're asking them to invest more time over here, right? So it's a very high probability that they'll not abandon you very soon, right? Then you'll ask them to enter your login. Again, login is a very decisive and very complex topic, whether you should have login in your onboarding or not. I'll not cover that today, but in case you do, don't ask them to create an account. I have not mentioned the word account anywhere, right? It's not an account. You're asking people to log in or sign up, right? Again, in a very simple way. And how am I asking them to log in? Phone number. I remember my phone number, I'm entering it. Simple, right? Oh, and also, it's not complex. It's one thing at one time, right? And what happens is when you reach the home screen, see what happens. I'm showing them all the possibilities. If you remember from before, all the active activation techniques I'm using, right? You can see what you can do. You can go to your crops. You can care for your crops. You can go to the market, right? You can get weather updates. You can call for support, right? So it shows the possibilities, and it's also personalized. Maybe you've entered potato in the first step, right? And it shows you what you need to do with the potato today, right? Maybe you have to add this fertilizer or whatever, right? So the home screen is actually customized, and the moment you see a customized home screen, you're far more likely to think, okay, this app is for me, right? And along with the imagery, the language, the investment in time, the connection, all these things, hopefully by the time you reach the home screen, the first 10-15 seconds, you have made up your mind that, okay, this app is actually useful to me. Maybe I should give it another chance. Right? I'll come back to it tomorrow or later today. And again, research has shown that if you come back to the app second, third time, it's very likely that unless they find a competitive app, and if they really need to solve that problem, they will keep using your app. Right? There's a very high probability of that. So it's just that you have to make them come back to the app once or twice more. Right? So by the time you reach the home screen, without doing anything else, you've entered the information that's doing, right? And hopefully by the time they've reached the home screen, they have felt like like you have felt when you press the accelerator on your BMW, right? That's the feeling that we want them to get, right? The best designers, the best products make an emotional connection with you, even without you knowing about it, right? That's where you want to be, okay? And a lot of apps do this, right? Subtly, right? This is a productivity app called Bear, right? These are the screenshots. When you install Bear for the first time, it's a Mac-only app, Mac, iOS, iPad OS. But the moment you install it, it shows you all your notes, right? It shows you 3-4 default notes, which are essentially a manual of how to use Bear. But they've got this beautiful like typography. They've got images of this Bear. Makes you feel in a certain way. Makes you feel at home. Makes you feel good, right? And you're just intrigued enough that you will install this app and try it out and give it a good shot, right? So they've activated you just by going to the home screen, right, without doing much else. Same happens in so many other apps, right? There's an app called Ulysses, right, which is for professional writers, right? They want to get the editing phase. They want to know that you can, this is an app for authors and editors and writers, right? And it shows you, right, you can edit stuff out, you can highlight stuff, right, which gives them the confidence. This app is for me, right? You've seen this in Notion, right? Shows you that you can add to-dos to Notion, right? You can add videos to it, right? This gives you the scope of Notion very quickly the moment you install the app. And you've seen this in many other platforms out there, right? This is Twitter, where when you're signing up for Twitter, it'll actually make you integrate Gmail, right? This is not just for Twitter, for Facebook, for LinkedIn, right? They'll make you connect other platforms because again, you are investing your time. And what happens is you might find friends who are on that platform. You feel more connected to the entire platform, right? And the likelihood, the probability of you using the app increases drastically, right? If they can just get you to do that, right? And then in case they're not able to do that, they'll ask you to follow people or interests, right? Let's say you choose, I'm interested in funny things. You might find a comedian who is familiar to you and follow them, right? So by the time you actually reach the home screen, you'll see tweets, you see people that are relevant to you, right? So it's not a blank screen, right? So it's again all those techniques combined to get to the LinkedIn, to the Twitter home screen. So it's extremely customized, and you by the end of the onboarding experience are activated, and you're far more likely to use Twitter again and again and again, right? So with this, I've mostly come to the conclusion of my talk, but essentially now I'm just going to leave you a couple of snippets of guidance, right? A summary of what we have learned, of things to keep in mind when you are designing your onboarding experience, right? 8 quick things. Like I said, right, think about your users. I have given some examples over here. Not every use case and users are the same, right? I've talked about Ulysses. They have authors in mind. I've talked about the Agri-tech app, who have farmers in mind. Think about your users. What does activation or value mean to them? Think about localization, right? Localizing images, icons, all those things. Think about copy, right? How will you talk about the value proposition of your app? Think about imagery. What images will spark a memory or make a connection with that person deep inside, right? Right? Images are processed at a much higher pace. So remember that. How do you do login? Well, right? How can you assist the people in case they're lost in terms of voice or any other way? How does the environment of the person, right, play a role over here in case, if they're writing in a place, if they're an author, right, how do you kind of customize it to their environment, to their workflow, right? What is the digital literacy level of that person? All of those things together will make an onboarding experience great for you, right? Finally, I just want to talk about 8 things that you can do, right? If you follow this, I'm sure you'll be on the right track to create a great onboarding experience, right? First is track the right metrics. Today, if you don't track the right metrics, you might feel like you have a great onboarding experience. You might, but there's no harm in tracking the right metrics. Like how many people are at the end of that acquisition activation funnel, right? How many people are, coming to your home screen and then never coming back to it? How are you tracking it? Is it part of your OKR KPI process? Right? If you do that, you will think in the right way, right? Know your acquisition funnel well, right? Are the best product managers, entrepreneurs, designers, developers, and know what they're talking about, right? In terms of acquisition, how are they hiring? Like how are they getting all these users? How are they coming through the end of this entire funnel and getting into the place where people are actually activated, right? Definitely, activation is a very important part of the entire problem statement, right? Solve activation before moving into engagement, retention. A lot of entrepreneurs, product managers, I see, want to solve engagement, retention, right? I get it. It's a very important problem. But unless you solve activation, it's not going to solve your engagement, retention. There's no point doing that when your activation is really messed up. There's no point wasting money, in my opinion. Know your users, right? I can't tell you what's a good activation for your product, right? Understand your users, their needs, their capabilities, their problems. and that will help you customize that onboarding experience. Define activation, what it means to you. Like I said, right? For Ulysses, for Bear, for an Agri-tech app, activation might be very different. Look at the data, right? If you're an EdTech app, see who are the kind of users who come back to your product, right? People who have attended classes. Then that means activation is attending class. How can you get them there really quickly, right? That's about activation. Map out, show low effort activation strategies, right? How can you get people there really quickly, right? From an Agri-tech example, getting to the home screen is very important. Getting to a customized home screen is important, right? That is my activation strategy. For Ulysses, it's about getting to that screen where they see all these predefined notes with all the possibilities. How can you get that quickly, right? Show it to real users. A lot of these things might be theoretical, right? But unless you show your users, get feedback, iterate, it's all theoretical, right? Show it to real users, test, iterate, right? You can do a lot of A/B testing. It works out really, really well, right? And you don't have to have a real product or a real app. You can test it out in Figma, right? And you can get real feedback. You can get visual feedback or just like body language feedback, right? And remember, onboarding is just the beginning. It's the first problem you have to solve, right? After you solve onboarding and that funnel is clear, you can move into engagement. All the other really challenging problems await you, right? This is a good segue to one of my upcoming talks for next month, which is creating impactful home screen experiences, right? So there are other problems awaiting you, other interesting problems, but solve onboarding first, and then you'll get to them, right? Finally, what are the metrics that will increase, right? Because it's about impactful onboarding. Your cost per install, effective cost per install will go down. You will have more retention because more people are not going to get dropped off at the activation stage, right? A lot of people are going to get converted. And your unit economics will improve, right? Because you're not spending that much more money acquiring users who will never convert, right? All of these numbers will increase for you if you do it well. Right. So hopefully, this was all useful to you. I covered a lot of things. I talked about onboarding, right? What was some of the problems in onboarding? I talked about Indian users, internet users who are across the world, some of the problems they face, right? How do you design effective onboarding mechanisms for them? I talked about activation, active and passive activation, right? How you can I also talked about how you can apply active activation techniques to the Agri-tech app. I showed you some other apps that use something like that. Right? Also talked about some of the strategies, some of the key tips that you can use to kind of improve your onboarding experience. And finally, I talked about impact as well. Right. With this, I'm at the end of my talk. Right, we'll be sending a lot of material related to this talk. A blog post will follow this YouTube video along with a cheat sheet. Right, in case you didn't have time to go through the entire talk, you want to share it with your manager, with your founder, with any of your colleagues, right, who don't have the time to go through the entire talk. We will create a cheat sheet, one page. You can see the entire talk, all the gist, right, and share it with your colleagues, right? To get that, definitely sign up at trivious.substack.com. We'll send you that without any spam, of course. And coming up in February, right, which is the continuation of this talk, I talked about impactful onboarding experiences. Next, I'll talk about creating impactful home screen experiences. You might have seen, right, like the home screen is really key. Even if you have a great activation onboarding experience, the home screen might make or break your product because that is something people will keep coming back to every day. So it's very important for an effective engagement and retention strategy, right? So I'll talk about that. It's a very challenging space, but having built a lot of home screens, I would love to talk to you about how to create effective home screen experiences, right? With that, I've come at the end of my talk. In case you're interested in kind of getting this deck, the links of that are there at the bottom. Trivious slash impactful onboarding. That's a URL shortener over there. I'm available. Those are my email IDs and my our website link. Right. At Trivious, we do a lot of really interesting stuff. Right. What you're seeing, from a onboarding perspective is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We've done a lot of research that backs all the stuff we've talked about. We do a lot of product research, a lot of audits to find out what people are doing wrong, right? In fact, the entire case study, the product transformation case study that I shared, the Agri-tech one, is all available on our website, trivious.com/product transformation. And it's like an example of an audit that we do. And we do a lot of product design work as well, right?